Hey guys, tonight we are stepping into a world that smells like roasted boar, honey-glazed delicacies, and just a little bit of political tension. You're about to wander into the private banquet of a Roman emperor, where chandeliers of all lamps flicker against marble walls, and golden couches look way too uncomfortable to actually nap on. You'll see things tonight that make you wonder if you even want to stay, because honestly, you might not survive the first day in ancient Rome if you had to actually keep up with this lifestyle. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, let me know down in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The moment you step into this palace, it feels like walking into a dream. The high vaulted ceilings gleam with mosaics. The light of all lamps flickers, reflecting off marble columns. The air is thick with the scent of spices, flower petals, and roasted meat, so much so that you can't quite tell if this is a kitchen or a temple. Some say a Roman emperor's banquet was like a recreation of Olympus on earth. It sounds exaggerated, sure, but once you're standing here you think, well, maybe not that exaggerated. The floor beneath your feet isn't just stone tiles, but a wide carpet of colorful mosaics. When you look down, you catch tiny images detailed like pixel art. Hunting dogs chasing hares, crocodiles from the Nile, even miniature mythological scenes. Some like to joke these mosaics were the Roman version of a projector, letting stories surround you as you walked. Historians still debate whether these decorations were just flashy displays of wealth or subtle lessons meant to influence the guests. Even the air itself is staged. You notice servants carrying small bottles, sprinkling rose water onto the ground, filling the hall with a sweet fragrance. Don't forget, this was 2,000 years before air fresheners and automatic diffusers. If you think modern parties are big on setting the vibe, well, the Romans were clearly masters of it long before. As you pass through the long corridor, you notice a line of guards in white togas standing at the grand doorway. Their expressions are cold, their spears catching the glow of the lamps. You can't help but wonder, is this dinner or is this war? That's just the Roman way. Every banquet needed at least a hint of military ceremony. Finally, you're led into the main hall. The sight makes you forget to breathe for a moment. Endless tables groan under silver platters and golden plates. A roasted pig glistens, its skin perfectly golden, while peacock feathers are stuck into dishes as if the food itself were masquerading as art. You ask yourself, is this dinner or is this an exhibition? But here, food was never just for eating. It was a declaration, a message that the emperor had money, resources, and absolute power. In the center of it all, the emperor reclines on a high couch, his robe glowing a deep purple. Purple, the most expensive dye in the Roman Empire, practically the color of power itself. You might have heard the saying, wear purple and you're too close to power, you will be watched. Historians still debate whether the expense was due to dye scarcity or if it was a deliberate form of social control, but you don't have the mind to ponder it further. You're already overwhelmed by the scene, a strange sense of pressure sinking into you. Though the lamps are gentle and the music soothing, you can't shake the feeling that every pair of eyes in the room is quietly weighing you, as if you're not here to eat, but to be tested. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a quiet voice whispers, welcome to the emperor's banquet, and good luck. Behind the shimmering hall, you're guided through a side passage that smells faintly of smoke and sweat. The polished marble gives way to stone steps, and suddenly you're not in the land of gold and purple anymore. You're backstage at the emperor's show. Here, the real pulse of the banquet beats. Hidden from the guests lounging on their couches, you notice rows of servants balancing silver trays that look too heavy for one person. One boy, barely in his teens, grips the edge of a platter loaded with roasted dormice stuffed with herbs. His arms tremble, but the expression on his face is carved in stone. Neutral, unreadable, as if someone had trained him not to betray fatigue. A fellow servant nudges him, whispering instructions about when to walk into the hall, like a stage manager cueing an actor. And that's what this is, really a performance where the actors don't get applause. There's a faint clatter of knives being sharpened, Somewhere nearby, a kitchen slave is hacking at slabs of meat. Sweat dripping into the firelight, the smell of sizzling pork mingles with the tang of garum, the famous Roman fish sauce. It's pungent enough to make your eyes water, and yet the Romans adored it. Some historians even compare garum's popularity to ketchup in America, but honestly, that's not fair. Ketchup doesn't knock you off your feet with the odor of rotting anchovies. The backstage feels like organized chaos. A scribe with a wax tablet darts in and out, reading from a list of names. He's making sure that the right food goes to the right guest, because in Rome, serving a dish wasn't just a culinary detail, it was a political message. A senator might feel insulted if he served a smaller peacock than his rival, and that could spiral into weeks of whispered complaints. Some scholars suggest this whole distribution system was a subtle tool of control, though others argue it was simply the world's most stressful dinner party etiquette. You pause to watch a group of attendants polishing goblets with cloths dipped in oil. The silver glints like moonlight, but the beaux don't dare look at it with pride. They whisper to each other in low tones, talking about which nobles are drunk, which ones are scheming, and which ones are safe to serve. You get the feeling these kids know more about the empire's politics than the average historian ever will. And then there's the flower team. Yes, the flower team. You watch as a line of servants carefully place fresh roses on the floor leading toward the main hall. The petals crunch softly under your sandals. It looks charming, but the smell is almost suffocating. Ancient writers actually complained about Roman feasts being drowned in perfume and blossoms, as if the emperor wanted to overwhelm every single sense. You think, maybe he just didn't trust the food to hold attention for long. But the strangest detail of all is the whispered rule you overhear. If the emperor suddenly coughs, every tray must freeze, a signal, perhaps a pause in the show. It's as if the emperor himself is conducting this orchestra of servants with nothing more than a throat sound. Whether this was truly a practiced code or just gossip among nervous slaves, historians still disagree. Some believe it was plausible, others think it's too theatrical. You, standing here, kind of hope it's not true, because if one man's cough could halt 100 people mid-step, this feast really is more theater than dinner. The deeper you wander, the more you realize the luxury upstairs rests on the exhaustion downstairs. The emperor's banquet is like a giant machine, and every cog has to keep turning in perfect rhythm. You can't help but think, if you had been born here, you might have been polishing goblets or carrying dishes of flamingo tongues without ever tasting one. And that thought lingers uncomfortably like the smell of garum on your clothes. You step back into the hall and suddenly realize something. It's not just about the food, or the golden plates, or even the smell of roasted boar. It's about where you're sitting. In Rome, your place at the table is your resume, your social ranking, and your future job application all rolled into one. And tonight, you're at the very edge of the couches, which is a polite way of saying, you're important enough to be here, but not important enough to matter. The Romans had a very particular way of arranging their dinner parties. The dining couches, called triclinia, formed a sort of horseshoe, and who sat closer to the emperor was almost as vital as what you ate. You might think the emperor just wanted company, but no, it was a chessboard. His right might be a favored general. To his left, a senator who had been a little too ambitious lately. Everyone's position was deliberate. Historians still debate whether the exact seating was arranged by the emperor himself or by clever advisors. But either way, the point was clear. You were being measured long before the first course was served. From your corner, you notice the nervous shuffle of a senator realizing he's been placed farther down than expected. His wife's face tightens, her smile freezing like plaster. That tiny move across the cushions is basically an entire speech. You're slipping, and in Rome, slipping wasn't just embarrassing. It could mean fewer clients, weaker influence, and maybe, eventually, no invitation to this hall at all. Then, there's the quiet opposite, the man who gets moved closer. Tonight, it's a young aristocrat who looks slightly terrified by his good fortune. His hands fidget, and he nearly spills his cup before a servant rescues it. The whole room notices. Of course, you can feel the air ripple with whispers. Nobody says it aloud, but you hear it in the tone of their laughter. Why him? What did he do? There's another layer of the seating code to who reclines versus who sits upright. Reclining on couches was a symbol of Roman status, a habit borrowed from the Greeks. But not everyone was allowed. Women often sat upright, unless they were of particularly high rank, while younger men and certain guests had to remain seated. To recline was to declare, "I belong here." You sprawled awkwardly on your side. Try to copy the graceful lean of those around you, but honestly, it just feels like you're one wrong move away from rolling onto the floor. And here's the funny part. Historians still argue over how strict these rules were. Some claim the seating was rigid and symbolic to the point of obsession. Others think it was more fluid, like a casual dinner party where status still mattered. But nobody pulled out a ruler to measure distance from the emperor. You leaned back, half listening, half daydreaming, and decided it was probably both structured, but just chaotic enough to keep everyone on their toes. Meanwhile, the emperor himself looks utterly at ease. He doesn't even have to speak. His position on the central couch, slightly raised above the rest, says everything. He is the sun around which everyone else orbits. You glance at the faces turned toward him, some eager, some calculating, some already drunk. The room hums with unspoken hierarchies, and you realize tonight's feast is less like dinner and more like a board game where every cushion is a move. You sip your wine, trying to blend in, though you know everyone else is silently noting your place, your posture, even how often the servants refill your cup. The food may be strange, the music soothing, but the real flavor of this banquet is politics, and it tastes both bitter and sweet. The first dish finally arrives at your corner of the table, and you realize something important. Romans didn't believe in keeping it simple. Forget bread and olives. What you're handed looks like a tiny piece of theater disguised as food. It has a small silver plate with something shiny and golden perched on top. A roasted dormouse, stuffed with nuts and honey, sprinkled with poppy seeds like it was dessert instead of dinner. You stare at it for a moment, wondering if this is an appetizer or a dare. Soon enough, more platters roll in. You see a giant peacock, feathers spread wide like it's about to take flight. The cook has cleverly reattached its feathers after roasting, making it look alive again. It's beautiful, absurd, and a little unsettling, like a taxidermy project gone culinary. A senator beside you leans in to whisper, "Exotic, isn't it?" But his smirk tells you this is less about taste and more about status. Romans believed that serving bizarre food proved you had access to the farthest reaches of the empire. Flamingo tongues, parrotfish, even a jelly made from sea urchins. These weren't dishes, they were trophies. You try to nibble politely, but some of the flavors hit your tongue like a prank. Sweet honey poured over salty fish, rich pork layered with garum sauce so pungent you almost cough. It's an acquired taste, and you're not sure you want to acquire it. There's a rumor that Emperor Elagabalus once served peas mixed with gold flakes just to show he could, of course. Historians argue whether that's true or just ancient gossip, but the fact that people believed it says everything about Roman extravagance. And here's the part no one admits aloud. The weirder the food, the less likely it was actually eaten. Guests often poked at their plates, taking a few bites, then passing it along. The real feast wasn't about flavor, it was about the spectacle of having it. It's like someone today ordering the most expensive item on the menu just to Instagram it. From your seat, you notice a tray of oysters being carried in on crushed ice, a luxury imported from the coast. One of the slaves stumbles slightly, and the room gasps as if the empire itself almost cracked. He recovers quickly, bowing so low you fear he might snap in half, and the oysters reach the table safely. The aristocrats cheer, pretending it's a grand save, though you know the poor beau will probably face harsh words later as you chew your dormouse slowly, because really, what else can you do? You realize the banquet menu is a silent map of empire. Each dish whispers a story of conquest and trade. Spices from India, glassware from Syria, birds from Africa. The empire doesn't need to brag with speeches. It just puts the world on a plate and lets you taste Rome's reach. Still, your stomach wonders if a simple piece of bread might have been better. And as you push aside another bite of honeyed fish, you catch yourself smiling. Maybe the true Roman tradition wasn't decadence, but irony, serving the kind of food that makes even the guests question if they're the punchline. You swirl the cup in your hand and realize this isn't just wine. In Rome, the drink was never simply about taste. It was about the company you kept, the conversations you joined, and the signals you sent with every sip. Tonight, your goblet feels heavier than it should, not because of the silver, but because of the invisible weight of politics floating inside. The wine itself is thick, almost syrupy, and you notice it's been mixed with honey. Romans rarely drank wine straight. They diluted it with water, sometimes flavored it with herbs, even seawater. Imagine pouring a splash of salt into your Merlot. That's the Roman way. Some scholars argue this habit came from a genuine concern for health. Others say it was to show control and discipline. After all, guzzling undiluted wine was seen as barbaric, the sort of thing uncivilized outsiders did. You take a cautious sip, and yes, it's sweet, salty, and complicated. Across the table, a senator raises his cup toward the emperor, his eyes gleaming with just the right balance of loyalty and ambition. You catch the signal. A toast is not just a toast, it's a performance. Whoever drinks with the emperor too quickly looks desperate. Whoever hesitates too long looks arrogant. It's a delicate choreography, and everyone is watching. A servant glides by and refills your goblet. The wine sloshes dangerously close to the rim, and you wonder if this is generosity or sabotage. One extra refill, and you might stumble into saying something foolish. In fact, drunkenness at these feasts was almost a sport. Some emperors liked to test their guests who could hold their liquor, who couldn't. There are stories of emperors sending home rivals who passed out mid-banquet, their political credibility collapsing alongside their dignity. Historians are still debating whether these tales are exaggerated, but you glance around and notice how carefully everyone is pacing themselves. At the far end, you spot a young aristocrat clearly failing the test. His laughter rings too loud, his gestures too wide, and a thin trickle of wine stains his toga. People nearby smile politely, but you feel the sharp edge in their eyes. This man is finished. Tomorrow, whispers about his lack of discipline will spread faster, and the garum smell in the kitchens. But not everyone fears the cup. Some turn it into a stage. A philosopher seated to couches away begins to drone about moderation, quoting lines from Greek texts. You nearly roll your eyes, but the others nod gravely, pretending this sudden lecture is profound instead of sleep-inducing. Perhaps this is the real trick of Roman banquets. One man drinks to excess, another turns his wine into philosophy, and both are silently judged. You glance at your own cup again. The liquid reflects the golden lamps above, like a tiny, glowing pond in your hand. For a moment, you wonder if you should sip faster or slower. Do you blend in or do you stand out? Either way, your wine isn't just wine tonight. It's a mirror of your place in the empire, swirling quietly with every move you make. The clatter of dishes quiets for a moment, and a new sound rises, the shuffle of hooves. You blink, thinking maybe the wine has gone to your head. But no, through the side doors, servants lead in a leopard, its golden coat shimmering under torchlight. The animal's handler tugs the rope carefully, keeping the beast calm, though you notice its tail flicks with irritation. And just like that, the banquet turns into a stage show. Roman emperors love spectacle, and sometimes dinner wasn't enough. Tonight, the emperor wants entertainment between courses, so you're treated to what feels like the ancient version of live dinner theater. A small crowd gasps as the leper is made to leap through a hoop, its claws flashing for just a second before it lands silently on the floor. A senator nearby claps with exaggerated delight, though his eyes dart nervously to the animal's teeth. You can't help thinking, this is less relaxing evening and more don't die before dessert. And the leper isn't the only act. Soon, a troupe of dancers enters, their costumes jingling with tiny bells. They weave between the couches, balancing trays of fruit on their heads while twirling. The audience chuckles softly when one nearly drops a fig but manages to recover. You find yourself admiring the precision these performers probably rehearse for weeks, only to be remembered for a few fleeting minutes. Then comes the strangest interlude of all. A man dressed as a satyr, complete with goat horns, staggers in and starts reciting verses that sound half poetry, half drunk rambling. You can't tell if this is comedy or philosophy, and perhaps that's the point. The Romans love blending serious themes with absurdity, reminding everyone that life and empire was always teetering between chaos and control. Historians still debate whether these banquet performances were meant purely for amusement, or if they carried subtle political messages tonight. From your cushion, you suspect it was both. Not all the entertainment is so grand, though. At one point, a servant brings in a trained parrot, its feathers dyed with saffron to make it glow golden. The bird squawks what sounds like a mangled version of Ave Caesar, earning a ripple of laughter. You think, here we are, the greatest empire on earth, pausing mid-feast to giggle at a parrot. Somehow, that feels perfectly Roman. What's striking isn't just the variety of acts, but the pace. Every time a dish ends, a performance begins, as if silence itself were dangerous. You realize these banquets weren't only about indulgence, they were about control. Keep the guests fed, dazzled, distracted, and they won't have time to plot. Whether that was intentional or just habit, scholars are still uncertain. But as you lean back, watching the leopard exit through the same doors it entered, you can't help but notice how the tension in the room eases. For a moment, fear turns into applause, and everyone feels united not by food, not by politics, but by the thrill of survival in the Emperor's living theater. And you, half amused and half exhausted, start to wonder, will dessert involve a giraffe? Because at this point, you wouldn't even be surprised. As the music fades from the last act, your attention shifts to something more subtle than leopards or dancers. The women scattered across the couches and benches. In this banquet, their presence isn't decoration, it's part of the unspoken script. You notice how carefully they move, how each glance seems to carry weight. This isn't just eating, it's theater. And they are both performers and symbols. At the Emperor's side sits the Empress, her robes gleaming with threads of silver, her hair arranged into an architectural masterpiece of braids and pens. She barely speaks, but her silence says plenty. In a hall filled with men boasting loudly and toasting heavily, her stillness is magnetic. You can't tell if she's bored, powerful, or simply playing the role she's expected to play. Historians still argue how much influence empresses actually had in these feasts. Some claim they quietly shaped politics. Others suggest they were mostly ornamental presences tonight. From where you sit, it looks like both are true. Further down the hall, you catch sight of a courtesan draped in fabrics almost as fine as the empress's. She leans toward a senator, laughing softly, her hand grazing his sleeve. The laughter isn't loud, but it carries across the marble like perfume. You realize she's not just entertaining, she's networking. In a world where senators' words could shift armies, being in their ear even for a moment meant power. And unlike the senators, she doesn't risk exile for a misplaced word. Her influence is quieter, slipperier, but real. Then there are the musician girls, seated near the edge of the hall. Their lyres rest in their laps between songs, their faces unreadable. They're not noble women, not courtesans, just professionals who drift in and out of these circles. Their role is to provide atmosphere without becoming the atmosphere. You wonder if they're silently taking notes in their heads after all. Who hears more secrets than the person strumming the background chords? Some scholars suggest musicians became informal chroniclers of these events, while others doubt they noticed anything beyond the strings. Either way, you catch one of them watching the Emperor closely, and it feels like she's storing away something for later. And what about the wives of lesser nobles? They sit upright, not reclining like the men, adjusting their jewelry nervously, exchanging polite smiles with one another. To you, it looks almost like a separate gathering layered onto the feast. A web of glances, whispers, and gestures. Perhaps they're comparing silks, or perhaps they're gauging which husband is gaining favor tonight. You realize something then. The women in this room, whether queens or courtesans, musicians or wives, all operate under rules you can barely see. Their roles may not be written into the history scrolls, but they're everywhere in the margins, shaping what unfolds. A servant brushes past you, nearly dropping a platter, and you notice the Empress finally turn her head just slightly, just enough to acknowledge the commotion. The entire table seems to pause, then quickly resumes as if nothing happened. Her glance was only a second, but it rippled through the room like a silent command. It makes you think. Maybe the Emperor leads the empire, but in the half-shadow of these banquets, power sometimes sits in quieter hands. The air shifts again, and you realize it's not just the wine or the food that fills the room, it's the sound. A pair of musicians step forward, carrying lyres, while another tunes a double flute. The first notes rise gently, bouncing off the marble walls and floating under the painted ceilings. It's not loud, but it settles into the space like a mist, wrapping around the tables, softening the clink of silverware and the occasional cough. You lean back, and for a moment you forget the leopard, the courtesans, even the emperor's watchful eyes. The music pulls you somewhere else. The lyre's strings hum steadily, while the flute weaves in like a breeze. Some historians argue Roman banquet music was meant to soothe digestion, basically the world's fanciest background playlist. Others claim it was a deliberate attempt to lull the guests into a relaxed state, like a hypnotic trick to keep the atmosphere calm. Tonight, it feels like both, but there's more than melody in the air. Servants carry in trays of burning incense, frankincense, myrrh, even cinnamon. The smoke coils upward, mingling with the music. You breathe it in and nearly sneeze. Romans love to overload the senses, and here it feels like sound and smell have merged into a single performance. You wonder if the emperor is trying to impress you or knock you unconscious. From your couch, you notice how the music seems to bend the mood. A senator who was arguing earlier now reclines quietly, his words swallowed by the melody. Another guest sways slightly, his cup forgotten in his hand. The empress tilts her head just a little, as if the tune has drawn her into some private thought. Music, you realize, is doing what words can't. It's smoothing over tension, patching cracks in the room. And yet, not everyone is entranced. Near the far wall, a philosopher frowns, clearly unimpressed. He mutters something about Greek influence and decadence. Scholars today still debate whether Roman banquet music was truly Roman or just borrowed wholesale from Greek traditions. You smile at the thought, because in this hall, arguing about cultural purity while sipping imported wine from Syria feels almost too ironic. Then the performers switch tempo. The flute shifts into a brighter, faster melody, and for a heartbeat, the hall stirs awake. Servants hurry, cups refill, voices rise, laughter spreads. It's like the music has turned a dial on the entire room. You catch yourself tapping your fingers on the couch without meaning to. Even you are part of the rhythm now. As the last note fades, silence doesn't return immediately. Instead, there's a warm hum left behind, a weight in the air like after a summer storm. The guests exhale together as if they'd all been holding their breath. You realize something simple but profound. In a hall full of power struggles, music was the only thing everyone surrendered to. At least for a few minutes, you sip your wine again, and this time it tastes different, less salty, more soothing. Maybe it's the same cup, maybe it's just the lyre still echoing in your chest. Either way, you can't deny it. Sound has become the invisible glue holding this strange evening together. The music fades into the background. But now another kind of sound rises, low voices, just beneath the level of the flute. You catch them like threads woven through the air. Whispered exchanges, half laughter, the rustle of secrets moving faster than the serving trays. You realize that in this hall, words travel differently. Some are meant for everyone. Others are like darts thrown across the couches, landing only where they're supposed to. To your right, two senators lean closer, their heads almost touching. You can't make out every word, but phrases drift your way. New law, dangerous, better to wait. Their smiles don't match their words, though. Outwardly, they look as relaxed as cats in sunlight, but their voices carry the tightness of strategy. You wonder if the emperor notices. Then again, maybe he doesn't need to. Perhaps he expects it, maybe even encourages it. On your left, a noble woman murmurs to her neighbor about the empress's jewels, her tone playful, but you sense a sharper edge. Compliment or insult? Hard to say. In Roman banquets, gossip was its own currency. A single phrase, dropped in the right ear, could ripple outward into careers rising or falling. Historians often debate whether these feasts were truly political battlegrounds or simply opportunities for idle chatter. From your seat, it feels like both light conversation for some, subtle warfare for others. You shift uncomfortably when a whisper lands a little too close to you. A younger guest, clearly tipsy, nudges your arm and mutters something about the governor of Syria. Too ambitious, he laughs as if it's a harmless joke, but his eyes dart nervously toward the emperor. You freeze. Do you laugh? Do you nod? Do you pretend you didn't hear? In a place like this, repeating the wrong line tomorrow morning would mean exile. Even the servants, gliding between couches with trays, aren't immune. You notice one pause ever so slightly. When a senator mentions a name, the boy's expression doesn't change, but you're sure he'll remember it. Slaves couldn't speak freely, but they were the empire's silent recorders. Some scholars suggest that information leaked from banquets through them, trickling into the streets. Others think that's an exaggeration, but as you watch the bow move on, you're not so sure. The emperor, meanwhile, says almost nothing. He just reclines, sipping slowly, occasionally glancing across the hall. And somehow that silence feels louder than all the whispers combined. Guests seem to adjust their tone when his eyes pass over them, as if each glance were a reminder. You are being watched. You lean back and realize you're caught in a strange paradox. The louder the feast, the more important the whispers, the laughter, the clinking goblets. The music, those are the distractions. The real feast is in the fragments of words traded between cushions, in the tiny gestures that look meaningless until you realize they're messages. Your wine feels warmer now, and you wonder if you've already said too much or maybe not enough. But then you smile faintly to yourself. If history is written by the victors, maybe it was first drafted right here, and whispers half swallowed by the music. The next course arrives, but it's not exactly what you'd expect at a feast. A servant sets down a steaming bowl near you, filled with what looks like a thick green broth. The senator beside you raises an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed, while another guest chuckles. The emperor's latest health tonic. You lean closer and catch a whiff of fennel, thyme, and something bitter you can't place. This isn't just food, it's medicine dressed up as dinner. Romans had a strange relationship with health. On the one hand, they enjoyed indulgence, honey-glazed meats, heavy sauces, endless wine. On the other, they sprinkled medical experiments into the feast like seasoning tonight. The emperor apparently wants to showcase a new herbal concoction from his court physician. Some historians think these health dishes were meant to show off Rome's knowledge, proving they had wisdom as well as wealth. Others argue they were more like party tricks, something to keep conversation flowing between courses. You sip the broth cautiously, and it tastes earthy, like drinking the garden soil after rain. Across the hall, a noble loudly praises the dish, claiming it will strengthen the stomach and calm the mind. You suspect he doesn't believe a word of it. But in Rome, complimenting the emperor's favorite brew is safer than gagging on it. Still, you catch a few suppressed grimaces as guests try to swallow without making faces. You wonder if anyone's stomach has ever actually been cured by one of these banquets, or if they all just went home with indigestion. The emperor gestures toward a physician standing proudly near the dais. He's an older man with sharp eyes, holding a scroll and nodding as if to say, "Yes, you're welcome for your improved health." He drones about the balance of humors a Roman belief that the body was ruled by fluids like blood, phlegm, and bile. If those got out of balance, well, you were in trouble. Tonight's soup, he claims, will rebalance everyone. You resist the urge to mutter, or unbalance us all together. There's even a touch of superstition in the mix. A servant whispers that crushed emerald powder has been stirred into the broth, believed to protect the heart. Whether that's true or just a rumor, you can't tell, but the sparkle in the liquid under the lamplight makes you suspicious. Some scholars argue emeralds were ground into remedies. Others say the idea is pure myth. Either way, swallowing gemstones doesn't exactly sound restful. Yet the strangest part is how normal this feels for everyone else. Romans often blurred the line between dining and doctoring. Honey was used as both dessert and antiseptic. Wine doubled as disinfectant and sleep aid. Even lettuce, you're told, was considered a cure for sleeplessness, though one philosopher once complained it only gave him more vivid dreams. As you set down the half-finished bowl, you realize the feast isn't just a meal, it's a laboratory, a stage for remedies and rituals that hover between science and show. Maybe the emperor truly believes he's healing his guests, or maybe he just enjoys watching senators squirm as they try to swallow medicine without spitting it back up. Either way, your stomach isn't quite sure which side of the experiment it's on. The wine keeps flowing, and by now you've noticed a strange rhythm to the feast. It's not just eat, drink, enjoy. It's more like a test of endurance. The servers move like clockwork, topping off every goblet before it's half empty. You begin to understand. In this hall, how you handle your drink says more about you than any speech you could make. On the far side, the general laughs too loudly, his cheeks already flushed. He's been toasting every 5 minutes, raising his cup so high it nearly tips. At first, people chuckle with him, but soon you see the side eyes, the little smirks. You know what they're thinking. Tomorrow, whispers will spread. He can't hold his wine, he can't hold command. In Rome, drunkenness wasn't just embarrassing, it was a public weakness. Some emperors even used these feasts to quietly measure their allies, but the game cuts both ways. If you refuse to drink, you risk seeming aloof, even ungrateful. That's the trick. Drink enough to blend in, not enough to stumble. Historians still debate whether these drinking tests were intentional political traps or simply a cultural quirk. From your corner, watching another senator slip off his couch and get quietly escorted out, you're leaning toward trap. You swirl your cup carefully, sipping slowly, trying to pace yourself. Still, the wine keeps appearing, darker, sweeter, thicker. A servant refills you without asking, his face blank. You wonder if he's counting how many cups each guest has drained. The thought makes you sit a little straighter. At one point, the emperor chuckles softly, raising his own cup. Instantly, every guest freezes mid-motion. Watching him, he takes a measured sip slow, deliberate, and reclines again. The room exhales together, and you realize he doesn't need to set the rules. His pace becomes the law. Nearby, a young aristocrat doesn't catch the signal. He downs his goblet too quickly, wiping his mouth on his sleeve. A ripple of laughter follows, polite but sharp. His father tries to cover with a joke, but the damage is done. You watch his shoulders slump, and you know tonight he's lost more than his balance. And yet, some guests lean into the danger. A poet rises unsteadily, cup in hand, and begins reciting verses about Bacchus, the god of wine. His words are slurred but oddly charming, and the crowd chuckles. Is he drunk, or is this a calculated act, an excuse to say risky things under the cover of intoxication? Scholars still argue whether poets at Roman banquets were tolerated fools or subtle truth-tellers. You sip again, deciding both could be true. Your head feels warmer now, the air heavier. The music and chatter blur into one soft hum, and you realize the test is working on you too. You're not sure if you're proving loyalty, endurance, or just your ability to stay awake. Either way, in this banquet, the line between pleasure and peril is as thin as the rim of your goblet. You hold it steady in your hand, pretending calm, but inside you can't help thinking, one more refill, and you might learn tomorrow's gossip the hard way. You lean back on your couch, the wine still swirling in your head, and suddenly you notice how much power is packed into something as small as a glance. The emperor hasn't spoken in several minutes, yet the whole room seems to pivot around the subtle movements of his face. One raised eyebrow, one faint smile. Even the twitch of his fingers can shift the entire atmosphere like a gust of wind. At one point, a senator makes a joke that lands flat. The laughter around him dies quickly, leaving an awkward silence. You glance at the emperor, his lips curl ever so slightly, not into anger, but into the faintest smirk. Instantly, the senator relaxes, and the room joins in polite chuckles, as if that tiny smirk had granted permission. You realize that here, comedy is not about humor. It's about survival. Later, a dish of oysters is carried in. The emperor takes one, raises it, and swallows it whole. That single motion becomes a cue. Suddenly, every guest rushes to copy him, as if oysters had just become the sacred food of the evening. It makes you wonder if anyone actually likes the taste, or if they're just swallowing politics disguised as seafood. Historians still debate whether emperors consciously used such gestures as signals, or if the guests simply overinterpreted everything. From where you sit, it feels like both. You notice how silence works here. When the emperor looks away, the hall loosens, laughter grows louder, whispers grow bolder. But when his gaze sweeps back across the couches, everything tightens again. It's like the entire banquet breathes with his eyes. One glance, and a man becomes nervous, another, and a woman straightens her back, suddenly graceful. You wonder if the emperor even enjoys this game, or if he's simply trapped in it too, forever aware that a careless look might topple someone's career. At one point, you catch his eyes on you. Just for a second, it's enough to make your heart stutter. Though his face betrays nothing, is he testing you, approving you, or did he simply notice you fiddling with your goblet too much? You can't tell. and that uncertainty feels heavier than any direct command across the hall. A guest sneezes loudly. The emperor doesn't move, doesn't even blink, and yet the poor man turns crimson, apologizing profusely. The room chuckles gently, but you sense the truth. Nobody's laughing at the sneeze. They're laughing to cover the silence of not knowing how the emperor will react. It dawns on you that this feast isn't just food and music. It is a silent study in psychology. The emperor doesn't need to lecture or shout. His power lies in the fact that everyone else writes meaning into his smallest gestures. Some scholars argue this was deliberate strategy. Others think it was simply the natural gravity of imperial presence. Either way, you realize you're sitting inside a theater where the emperor's face is the stage and everyone else is the audience. And whether you laugh, whisper, or sip your wine, you're part of the performance too. Just when you think the evening can't surprise you anymore, the entertainment takes a stranger turn. A jester shuffles into the center of the hall, his clothes patched with mismatched colors, bells jingling softly with every step. His face is painted with exaggerated lines, his grin too wide to be sincere. He bows so deeply you worrying he might fall over, then pops upright and blurts out a joke about senators being as slow as Roman roads in winter. The guests chuckle, some a little too loudly, eager to prove they have a sense of humor. You realize the jester has a strange power here. He says things no senator could, mocks people in ways no general dares. Of course, everyone laughs, but some of the smiles are tight, some strained. You wonder, is this laughter genuine or just insurance? Historians still argue whether jesters at Roman banquets were real positions or just occasional performers. Watching this man bounce around, you suspect he's both comic relief and a political safety valve. Then, without warning, the room shifts tone. A philosopher rises from his couch, adjusting his robe like a curtain call. He launches into a solemn reflection about virtue, moderation, and the fleeting nature of life. His voice booms, filling the room with slow, heavy words. The laughter fades into silence. You sip your wine and try to look thoughtful, though honestly you're fighting a yawn. This contrast is almost comical in itself. One moment you're giggling at a fool juggling figs. The next you're nodding along to a lecture on the futility of wealth. It's like flipping between stand-up comedy and a university seminar without any transition. The guests seem used to it, though some actually look inspired, while others stare into their goblets, eyes glaze. Perhaps that's the real rhythm of these feasts. Humor to loosen the tension, philosophy to remind everyone they're still civilized. The philosopher quotes a line from Plato, and the emperor nods slowly, which immediately makes everyone else nod too. You glance around and see heads bobbing like waves, as if agreement itself is contagious. Still, you catch the faintest smirk on the empress's face, as if she knows half the room isn't listening. Meanwhile, the jester has crept to the edge of the hall. He makes silly faces behind the philosopher's back, earning stifled giggles from servants and younger guests. You stifle your own laugh, worried the wrong person might notice. But you think, maybe the philosopher and the jester aren't opposites at all. Maybe they're two halves of the same act, the fool saying what's forbidden, the scholar dressing it in wisdom. Both are tolerated, as long as the emperor approves. You shift on your couch, feeling the weight of the evening pressing down. It's hard to say which lulls you more, the drone of the philosopher or the steady hum of the background music. Either way, you sense the emperor has achieved exactly what he wanted. Between jesters and philosophers, wine and whispers, the guests are both entertained and subdued. And you, caught in between laughter and drowsiness, feel yourself drifting. Maybe that's the point. Maybe this whole evening is designed to make you forget where the politics end and the performance begins. By now, the courses are slowing, the wine has mellowed, and the room feels softer, like a theater winding down after its final act. But before the guests slip into full drowsiness, a group of attendants enters with something unusual. They carry trays not of meat or exotic birds, but of grains bowls of wheat, barley, and millet, carefully arranged as if they were treasures. You blink, thinking, after flamingo tongues and stuffed dormice, we've ended up with porridge ingredients. But in Rome, nothing is that simple. The grains aren't meant to be eaten as is. They're symbols. One attendant sprinkles a few kernels of barley onto the floor in front of the emperor. and the crowd murmurs approval. It looks almost like a ritual, and in a way, it is. Grains meant fertility, harvest, and the steady heartbeat of empire. For all their luxuries, Romans knew their power rested on fields, farmers, and bread. This moment is like a reminder. The empire isn't just gold and banquets. It's also grain ships crossing the Mediterranean, keeping the city alive. Historians still debate whether these closing acts were religious rituals, theatrical flourishes, or just practical symbolism. Some argue they were direct nods to Ceres, the goddess of agriculture. Others think they were simple gestures of gratitude for abundance. Tonight, you can't tell the difference, and maybe the Romans didn't either. What matters is the mood, solemn, calming, grounding after hours of indulgence. You watch as the guests touch the grains lightly, almost reverently, before passing the bowls along. A senator mutters a line about Rome's eternal plenty, and though you suspect he said the same line at 100 feasts, people nod anyway. Even the courtesans grow quieter, their laughter softened. It's as if everyone is agreeing to a collective sigh, a symbolic end note. The emperor lifts a small scoop of wheat, letting it fall slowly back into the bowl. The grains make a faint rustling sound, like soft rain. That single gesture feels heavier than the leopard act or the philosopher's speech. It's not dramatic, but it speaks directly. This is the foundation, the invisible thread that holds Rome together. And you realize, after all the spectacle, golden dishes, exotic meats, endless wine, it's this simple image of grain that lingers. Maybe that was the point. The emperor doesn't just want to dazzle his guests with wealth. He wants to remind them that his power rests on something more basic, more essential. The bowls are taken away, the incense burns lower, and the hall exhales together. You feel a strange calm settle in your chest. The games, the whispers, the test, they're fading now. What remains is the quiet assurance that Rome endures, as steady as a field of wheat swaying under the sun. The night deepens, the lamps burn lower, and at last the banquet begins to unravel. Servants move more slowly now, collecting empty plates, sweeping up petals from the marble floor. The chatter has softened into a warm murmur, like waves receding after a storm. You rise carefully from your couch, your body heavy with food, wine, and the weight of unspoken tension. As you walk toward the exit, you glance back over your shoulder. The hall that once roared with laughter, music, and leopard paws is quieter now, filled with the echo of what just happened. The musicians pluck gentler notes, the courtesans recline in softer poses, and the emperor himself has shifted slightly on his couch. His eyes half closed, he looks serene, but you know even in that calm, he is watching, memorizing, calculating. You notice small details you missed before. A servant collecting half-eaten dishes whispered something to another before vanishing behind the curtains. A senator lingers at the emperor's side, too nervous to leave first, pretending to admire the mosaics on the wall. A young noble stares into his cup, replaying the evening's slips and hoping nobody remembers. These quiet after moments are almost more revealing than the feast itself. And the sounds, the clinking of silver plates as they stack, the faint rustle of robes as guests shuffle toward the doors, the sigh of someone finally free to breathe outside the emperor's gaze. Even the echoes feel deliberate, as if the marble itself is rehearsing the memory of tonight. Some historians argue that the after-banquet was just as important as the feast itself, the moment when alliances were confirmed or broken in silence. Others think it was merely fatigue. You, standing here, feel it's a mixture of both. At the doorway, a cool breeze slips in from the night. The heavy perfume of roses and incense clings to your clothes, and you wonder how long it will take before the smell fades. Outside, the Roman streets are dark and quiet, the hum of the city muted under the stars. You hear the faint bark of a dog, the rattle of a cartwheel in the distance, but compared to the hall, it feels like stepping into another world. You pause, looking back one last time. The laughter, the whispers, the leopards leap, the philosophers drone, the grains of wheat all blur together in your memory, like fragments of a dream you're already forgetting. Was it spectacle? Was it politics? Or was it simply dinner? Historians still argue, but you, after living it tonight, know the truth. It was all of it at once. And as you step out into the cool Roman night, you realize the strangest thing of all: the emperor's banquet didn't just feed you, it swallowed you whole. The night has slipped into stillness now, The marble halls, once alive with laughter and whispers, are only echoes in your memory. The flicker of torches has faded into darkness, leaving behind the softer glow of stars above Rome. You walk slowly, each step lighter than the last, as though the weight of the banquet is melting away into the quiet streets. The sounds of the city are distant, an occasional cart, the murmur of a fountain, a breeze moving through olive trees. Compared to the crowded banquet hall, this silence feels almost unreal, like drifting in a half-dream. You breathe in the cool air, free of incense and perfume, and it fills your chest with calm. Your mind begins to let go of details, the gold plates, the wine. The emperor's glance and instead holds on to the rhythm of your footsteps, steady and gentle. Even the most extravagant banquet ends in this way, not with noise, but with silence, not with spectacle, but with rest. And as you lie back now, wherever you are listening, you can imagine yourself under that same Roman sky. Centuries ago, the empire fades, the feasts fade, even the whispers fade. What lingers is only the hum of night, the softness of sleep pulling you further inward. So let yourself drift. You've survived the emperor's table. You've walked out into the cool air, and now you can rest, safe and unburdened.